everyone, it's Kim and welcome back to Bookmarks and Breadsticks. Welcome back to Bookmarks and Breadsticks. I am here today with one of my favorite kind of videos or favorite things to talk about, which is the James Beard Awards. Every year, the James Beard Awards has two different sections, one dedicated to chefs and restaurants in the culinary scene, and there are the James Beard Media Awards. Now, we have gone 2 years without any James Beard Awards, partially because of the pandemic, but partially because the organization came under fire with some criticism about the lack of representation in their nominations each year. So 2022 did highlight the return of the James Beard Awards, including the Media Awards. There are tons of different areas in the Media Awards, including best TV shows, reality show competitions. There's also other areas of the Media Awards, including television, radio production, podcasts, episodics, and much more. But my favorite section is obviously the James Beard Media Awards for writing, and specifically, while there are numerous categories, my favorite is for food writing. This year we had 3 nominations for the Food Writing Award, and I went ahead and read all 3 of them. Now, the awards have come and gone. You can get the full list of winners down below, but this is one of the biggest places or most important places I go to get recommendations in food writing. Past winners include Michael Twitty for his book, The Cooking Gene in 2019, and Bren Smith, Eat Like a Fish, which won in 2020. Now in 2022, we are back with 3 nominations. Now, 2 of these books I have in hard copy. The third I actually have wrapped up in my Unwrap My TBR series and don't actually know where it is on my shelves, but I can say with confidence, I own all 3 of this year's James Beard Award-winning films because I wanted to read them for this very video. The first nomination is a book you guys should recognize from my channel, Getting Something to Eat in Jackson, Race, Class, and Food in the American South by Joseph C. Iwudzie Jr. Now, I did a whole reading vlog about this book, and I will link it up in the cards and down below. But essentially, this is a really insightful book about Jackson, Mississippi, and what Iwudzie does, someone who is a specialist and a PhD in sociology, really decides to follow food and hunger across different class levels in the Black community. We spend time with Joseph as he shadows the homeless, also shadows those of the middle class and maybe a little bit more well off, and also those who fall just on the border of poverty line and hunger. Now, this book is very powerful, and what I loved is not that I would call each person a character, but we had a different person with real life situations to follow throughout the narrative, which really helped reinforce some of the fundamental flaws in our food system in the United States. These are real people. Some of their names are obviously changed, but he spends a great deal of time in the South following real people, some who struggle and wonder what they're even going to feed their children that night. It also brings up a great conversation about food in Jackson and food in the South is not just chicken, grits, and collard greens, and what negative impact having those traditional food items forced upon these people when they're actually not that healthy for you. There's a great moment where we follow a team of men who go from homeless shelter to homeless shelter and soup kitchen to soup kitchen. And when they check in for the morning and sit down for their meal, they are presented with fried chicken and collard greens for a breakfast meal somewhere around 7 in the morning. And it's not what they want to eat, but what options do they have when this is considered, you know, a free handout? So you oftentimes see, even though the homeless, they are hungry, and those that do get to eat are often eating things that are making them sick. On top of that, because I'm specifically focusing on this one part of the book, but we also follow that some of these homeless individuals who choose not to visit doctors despite having medical ailments because they know that they'll lose their place in line or lose their small window of opportunity for a hot meal. And oftentimes, if you miss the window, you can go upwards of 12 hours before you have something else to eat. So Getting Something to Eat in Jackson, again, I have a whole vlog about this, and this was one of the 3 James Beard Award nominations. I think it's important to note in Awoodsey's work that he is not a culinarian. He really comes from a world of sociology, which humanizes, I think, more than anything, and gives visibility to people, not only just the homeless. Sometimes I think when we talk about food and hunger in America, we think of the rich and overindulgent, sometimes categorized as wasteful, and then the other side and extreme, which is poverty. There is other areas and classes within this system that the author does follow, including beyond those 2 extremes of extreme wealth and poverty, there are different classes as well. And it's important, and it's what I think the book did very well was show you what it's like to be on assistance and still not get by based on availability, and also how there are systematic barriers that keep some of these people, or a majority of these people, from rising up out of their negative situations. There is a perpetual, flawed, and ancient system that keeps these people in these lower classes despite their best efforts to get jobs, care for their children, and work together for improvement. This is a really powerful book, and I also think it's interesting to see, as you'll see in the other 2 nominations for food writing, that we are focusing on non-white areas and non-white relationships with food, which is important. Or you could even say marginalized voices and the impact food has had on these groups and individuals. By and large, I completely understand why Getting Something to Eat in Jackson, Race, Class, and Food in the American South by Joseph C. Awoodsey, Jr. did receive a nomination for food writing. It is a vivid portrait of African-American life in today's urban South that uses food to explore the complex interactions of race and class. The second nomination this year was The Man Who Ate Too Much, The Life and Times of James Beard. I read this book back in July and listened to it as an audiobook. Now, this is a very thorough look at James Beard, who has a whole award system named after him. Considered the culinary gourmand and one of the most important figures in American cuisine. Now, there have been many biographies about James Beard, and what makes this book different is that the author investigates and does thorough research in the fact that James Beard was a closeted gay man, and how throughout the book you watch how James Beard really straddles the line between the effeminate and being more out or hinting at his closeted gayness, and how he could still cater to a male audience that now wanted to learn a thing or 2 about cooking. You see that many of James Beard's friendships throughout his life are more with female companions, but you also get glimpses into his relationships. I think it's really important to note that during this time period where James Beard is alive, especially coming out of World War II, machoism and really forward masculinity was what was acceptable in society coming out of the war. So James Beard and many men of the time lived closeted and in fear because that was just not what society wanted. They shunned and rejected what was considered a weak or frilly man. Meanwhile, James Beard himself was well over 6 feet tall and a very large man and a larger-than-life personality, yet somehow was still seeking companionship, all while monitoring and living under this radar in society. I think it's a really powerful and fascinating book. I've actually read many biographies about James Beard. One I read earlier this year because it was one of the first biographies and first nominated James Beard Award books in food writing. So I found it really, not ironic, but a fun coincidence to read such an earlier biography and then this newer release, which actually references the very same book. I'll put the pictures, and I'm sure you'll see them after I come in post-production, the covers and the books I'm referencing on my side, because like I mentioned, it's actually wrapped up on my Unwrap My TBR. I actually listened to this book and found that it was really, at times, very sad and frustrating to watch James really just want validation and loneliness. He had a very unique relationship with his mother, who married for convenience, and James was her only child. Meanwhile, he learns later in life that his father had a whole separate life, a whole wife and children, and had that relationship because he knew he was in a loveless marriage. As James Beard gets older, he has a little bit more sympathy for his father's situation. James Beard, throughout the book, you also learn, constantly had money troubles. And it was very interesting to think of a man, essentially, you know him as a symbol, you know him as the icon on the medal, and to know that someone who was so in demand in American cuisine for endorsements, for partying, for catering, for advice, was constantly worrying about his next paycheck. He also had tumultuous relationships with those people who helped him in his writing and editing. It's a very thorough and interesting book, and the lens of his closeted queerness I really found enlightening, as it's not that I never quite cared, and cared sounds harsh as someone who is deceased, but I never knew who James Beard married. Like, you could go to James Beard Wikipedia page and never see that he was married. So you're like, okay, he was never married. But to think about and contextualize the time period that James Beard was operating in, becoming this gourmand on television, catering to women across the world, but also needing to cater to men, to say, yes, you can grill, and yes, let's talk about outdoor cookery. It was a very interesting, almost having a facade, two different personalities, but somehow both of them being who he is, yet neither of them fully being James Beard in his entirety because his queerness was locked away. It's a really powerful book. It is on the longer side for an audiobook, but I did thoroughly enjoy it. And again, another example of representation of a marginalized group that we don't hear a lot about in the food and culinary world, which is of the gay LGBTQ community. Now, I know there are tons of chefs in the LGBTQIA+ community, and I hope to see more of their writing in the future as well. I have talked about a few of those chefs. One that comes to mind is Dominique Crenn. She is the only woman with multiple Michelin stars in the United States, and is happily married to a woman with 2 children. But I want to see more representation, and to see these kinds of stories being nominated for James Beard Food Writing Awards is exciting. The third and final James Beard nominated Food Writing Award book was Franchise: The Golden Arches in Black America by Dr. Marcia Chatelain. This book came out in 2022, and as I mentioned, the James Beard Awards were absent for a couple of years. So it's not surprising to see what could be deemed as an older publication still have a nomination, because it didn't have an opportunity prior. So I actually read this book a few years ago with Dan and really thoroughly enjoyed it. To read the inside cover, just because I'm such a fan, an estimated 1/3 of all American adults eat something from a fast food restaurant every day. Millions start their mornings with paper-wrapped English muffin breakfast sandwiches, order burritos hastily secured in foil for lunch, and end their evenings with extra value dinners consumed in cars. But while people of all ages and backgrounds enjoy and depend on fast food, it does not mean the same thing to each of us. For African Americans, as acclaimed historian Marcia Chatelain reveals in Franchise, fast food is a source of both despair and power, and a battlefield on which the fight for racial justice has been waged since the 1960s. Now, I remember reading this book, and this was actually the first author to introduce me to food apartheid, which is the systematic racism that deprives communities, usually those of color, access to fresh food. In the absence of fresh food, what you do see on every street corner is something like a fast food restaurant. This, specifically the Golden Arches, as you can surmise, focuses entirely on McDonald's, and both the good, the bad, and the ugly of what McDonald's has done for these communities. Not only is this considered an unhealthy food item, but you also learn about the money invested by local franchisees, into their communities, sponsoring baseball teams, becoming a fundamental part of the community, which sounds all rosy, but if you're looking through rose-colored glasses, you might mix the fact that this is a way to almost infest and poison a local community, because if that franchise closes, you lose funding for local community projects. But it is that very franchise that is also providing unhealthy food. It is also often not a place where some people go there for jobs, but also it can become the stomping grounds for drug exchanges and other illegal activities. It's a very powerful and thoroughly researched book. I love that a woman of color and a culinary historian got to write this. I actually follow the author on Instagram and continue to learn more from her to this day. I think it's very easy to blame McDonald's for a lot of the problems that we see in those Black communities, as the author investigates. At the same time, there are also some who have benefited and have created Black wealth from being franchisee owners under the McDonald's umbrella. So it's not a fully evil, but they are evil kind of situation. I think of like the evil Amazon as another proxy. But it's more than just a food health issue within this book, which I thoroughly appreciated. We get to learn about things about discrimination, lack of promotions, lack of managers, and all of the ways that McDonald's thinks it's helping, as I mentioned earlier, investing and allowing franchisees to sponsor local events, but also how some of that will be taken away in other situations if a franchise does not live up to expectations from McDonald's HQ. There's also conversations about lack of diversity in C-suite leadership. I highly recommend you read all 3 of these James Beard nominated books, but which one was the winner? It was actually Franchise, The Golden Arches. And I really understand why it won. Of all the 3 books and reading them, obviously I only vlogged one on camera for you guys, but of the 3, Franchise was the one that captivated me with storytelling and writing. So part of me when I'm evaluating and looking at books, what do I think of the research? Like, is this important? I found all 3 of these nominations very important to focusing on food and its food dynamics in the Black communities in the South, and one about the closeted gays and the angle of James Beard growing up and living as a closeted man in America, despite being, one could argue, the first American chef celebrity. But I really loved Franchise and found myself eager to read the next chapter and gripping. Not only is this book thoroughly researched, but you're really going to approach your hatred, or at least my dislike of McDonald's, from multiple angles, just learning how there is such a political undertone and that there really is a monster mob mentality at times to McDonald's. These giant corporations can be so detached from the communities that they impact. It's all about dollars and sales. And I am very excited for what her next book will be. But these were the 3 nominations for the 2022 Food Writing Awards. Obviously, the awards have come and gone, and I am so excited to see what the nominations will be for 2023. Let me know in the comments below, would you pick up any of these 3 books? I am also still reading the James Beard Award nominated books from the early 1990s as part of my James Beard Award reading challenge. I recognize it's August and I have given you no updates. I promise there is a video coming in September because I'm getting through quite a few of the books as we speak. So you will see a nod to that in September. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. On your way down, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.